It is now my pleasure to introduce today's keynote conversation with Doug DeVos, co-chairman of Amway's Board of Directors.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks for this opportunity to have a chance to connect with everybody today. This is a thrill. I know you've had a lot going on. You've been able to hear from great speakers. You've been able to hear some great content. You've heard a lot of great information. And as we bring it to a close today, my job is to make sure I don't screw it up, because you've had a lot of progress being made, and everyone's worked really hard to make things go so well. What I want to do is try to build as best I can on some of the themes that have been talked about, especially with this idea of resilience. And I want to start with a story that I experienced many years ago. And some of you who are from Grand Rapids and have been around here for a long time will remember that before the Plaza Towers was the Plaza Towers, it was the East Bank project. So we're talking late 80s, early 90s. And for a lot of reasons, we were involved with it. It was after the Amway Grand Plaza was built, and so we were involved. But a lot of things went wrong with that project. The siding on the building was falling off, so we had to put nets around so it didn't fall on people. The toilets were backing up. That wasn't good. It was kind of smelly. The ventilation wasn't good. There was a lot of problems, and a lot of people that had moved in had left. And so we had a meeting. Amway was involved with it. I was relatively young at the time. We had a meeting amongst our families, the Vanano family, my family, and my dad and Jay. And the subject was, what do we do now? And so there was a couple presentations. There was one presentation that said, it's all gone wrong. Just wrap it up, take the insurance, figure out some other way to go forward, let it go. And the other one said, well, there's more risk, there's more cost, but you go in and you change it, you rebuild it, you start over, and you just kind of take your losses and move forward. Well, those of us in my generation, the second generation, are trying to have a little bit, probably too much fun with the discussion. And somehow, I don't know who raised it, it might have been me, might have been Dave Van Andel, not exactly sure, but one of us said, let's go with the tear it down option, and if we do that, we can make a Hollywood movie out of it. I think it was right after the time of these Bruce Willis movies, Die Hard or whatever. We'll bring them in. It's going to be a great thing. We'll take it down. We'll blow it up. It'll be so fun. It'll be this big adventure story, whatever. Grand Rapids would be on the map. And we were having a lot of fun with that discussion. Probably too much fun. Those of us in the second generation anyway. And thankfully, we noticed the room got quiet. And we started to look back and forth. Rich was at one end of the table, Jay was at the other, and my father quieted us all down a little bit and said, Jay, what do you think about that? And we all kind of looked down the other end, and there's Jay. And Jay was just shaking his head, looking at us, shaking his head. Not the first time he'd done that to us. Shook his head and said, no. No. He said, we don't blow things up. We build things up. We're going to move forward with what we had originally hoped, what we had originally dreamed. We're going to move forward and rebuild. That's the way that we're going to go. Wow. And Rich said, I'm with you. Pretty simple. Pretty straightforward. Not a lot of dialogue, even though they'd heard presentations. They knew where they were going to go. And I think that story to me reflects so vividly on the situation that all of us are facing today. You have kind of two different paths. Do you give up? Do you blow it up? Or do you make the determination to build it up and to say, we're going to go forward from here? We're not going to let the circumstances hold us back, even though they are some of the most unbelievable circumstances we've faced and could never have expected when 2020 started. Who would have thought we'd be here? But yet here we are, and we got to deal with it. So that story to me reminds me, and I hope it reminds you, of the fact that we have to find the way to press on. And as business leaders, That's our job. That's our role. That's our responsibility. And as I look around, I believe that business leaders are not only business leaders, they're community leaders as well. You have a role in your business. You have a role with your employees. You have a role with the employees' families. You have a role with your neighborhood and our broader community. People look to you because you make decisions. You make things happen, whatever it may be. And it's important for us to understand not only the specific silo, if you will, of our business and what we're doing, but the role that we play in the broader community. And never has that been more visible or more important than it is today. So just if you kind of look with me a little bit and you say, well, if in our society, you could break it down and call it 4 institutions. Business would be an institution right there. Then you would say, well, government is an institution. Education is an institution. And then you have community. Let's call it community and broadly. This would be your houses of worship. This would be your charitable organizations. This would be your neighborhood associations, clubs, whatever. Those all add to the richness of our society. And they all work together. And sometimes it's too easy at tough times to look over the wall and think of all the things that those folks are doing wrong. It's real easy to do that. I got a long list of complaints I could have against the government. You do too. Hey, let's get started, have a cup of coffee, see where that goes. And they might be right, they might be wrong. But as a business leader and a community leader, you and I know we could be better too. And before we start to fix the speck in somebody else's eye, let's make sure we look at the log in our own. As business leaders, we have influence over a huge piece of the economy. We have influence over the economic well-being of our employees and our neighborhoods and our communities around us, our supplier networks, whatever your business may be. We have a responsibility to our customers and our employees. How we execute that responsibility, how we act with that influence is vital. Never more important than now. When we're asked to make sure we're not only good business leaders, we got to start there, but we understand the fullness of our role. That we protect and keep our customers and our employees safe in the environment, that we figure out new ways to operate in a COVID world so that people can stay safe and stay productive at the same time. And in the midst of COVID, we are also faced with the racial injustice that we've dealt with, that we're dealing with as a society. We have a chance to influence and change that by our hiring practices, by our engagement in our community, by our engagement with the education community, by finding and reaching out and creating opportunities, jobs, incomes for people from all walks of life, from all different backgrounds. And it won't just happen in the normal course of business. We're going to have to think differently, and we're going to have to be purposeful to step out and make that happen so we can make change. The term of art today is diversity, inclusion, or equity and inclusion. Great work that must be done by all of us to think through, to reach out to people in our community who have been denied access to the opportunity, the economic opportunity that we influence dramatically. So before we look to other people, other institutions, let's make sure we look at ourselves and say, what can we do to be better? At Amway, we would talk a lot of times about how we wanted to grow the business, how we wanted to be bigger, how we wanted to expand, whether geographically or grow sales or introduce products. But we found our best discussions were when we looked at ourselves and said, what are we going to do to be better? And if we start out being better, the bigger part tends to take care of itself. So as business leaders, as community leaders, let's challenge ourselves to be better. And when we're better, then we're positioned to build up our community and impact everyone in our community, especially those who've been denied access to income opportunities and to a better life. We can influence our community and make it better in the years ahead. And that's a challenge worthy of accepting, I think. So I'd love to leave you with that thought. And now we're going to have a chance to have a discussion. Nate's going to join me here, and we're going to talk a little bit. He's going to explore what I've said well and what I've probably said wrong. All right, over to you, Nate. Help us out.
Thanks,
Take us home.
Thanks, Doug. So we've heard several leadership lessons and stories about business surviving and thriving in a new reality. And here your call to action, right? That business has not only an opportunity, but an obligation to impact how it goes about things, to impact communities in a really positive way. More insight on that. So I think about the specifics. So I opened this morning with, don't let this just be a nice event.
Right.
Like, walk away with something specific that you can do. So imagine I'm a young leader, a new leader, and I think, like, so now what? Like, I'm inspired, I'm in, I think it's a great idea, but how do I get started?
Yeah. Well, so you get started by taking action. That's the first thing. If you've heard something that's important to you today, if you heard something that resonated with you today, think through how you're going to actually implement it, how you're going to take it the next step forward, because you've heard a lot of good things. I love attending conferences like this. Oh, that's good. And then as soon as you wrap it up, you go back and work happens, life happens, and you forget to do something with it. Have a specific plan to do something with it as you take it from here. A number of years ago, I spent all my stories are back in the 80s, sorry gang, but Amway was involved with the United Nations Environmental Program. We sponsored an environmentalist named Robert Swan. He had walked to the South Pole, and now he was going to walk to the North Pole, and it was called Ice Walk, and we were the sponsor. And we were in New York at the Grand Hall, the Assembly of the United Nations, and he was talking about his trip and everything he was going to do, because they just get on, they have sleds with stuff, and they walk, and they're worried about polar bears, and they're worried about other sorts of things. And as I was sitting there listening to him, it just struck me, at the end of all this fanfare, where it's nice and warm in a controlled environment, he's going to be dropped off somewhere, and he's going to have to take that first step if he's going to make it to the North Pole. And I think as a conference like this, what's the first? Don't get too confused with the 37 other steps you're going to have to take. Take the first one. But think through it and be deliberate so you can take that step. And once you've gotten through it, take the next one.
Outstanding. Don't make it harder than what it is, right, is what we're hearing. Take one step forward. Maybe it's a conversation with someone. Maybe it's engaging in a discussion that you'd rather not engage in, but leaning into that, as we've been talking about throughout the day today. So my next question really is about an uncertain future. And so we've heard a lot about leadership fear, if you will, and unsure how to navigate. And maybe the answer is similar. I don't know, but I wonder about how we might continue to cope with a forecast that is uncertain for us as leaders. Any thoughts?
Well, good luck, right? I mean, who would have thought this would have happened to us? Like I said, who would have thought a year ago that we'd be experiencing what we are today? I think you just have to, you have to tuck this away, and you can't put things like this aside. Well, that'll never happen again. Well, maybe this specific thing won't happen again, but you're going to experience disruption. Something's going to go wrong. So I think you got to come back to this, observing your marketplace and where you are. What are the risks that you may have wanted to discard or not prepared for enough? You have to think through some of those things. Who are you as an organization? Are you nimble? Are you agile? Are you ready to make shifts from one thing to the next? Have you diversified, or have you tried to eliminate some of the risks in your business operations? Are you prepared for future generations? Are you thinking long term? How do those things come together? To a certain extent, you can never guess what's going to go wrong and say, well, I have to plan for this scenario or that scenario. You can go through that exercise if you have the time. Most of you don't have the time. You're all working so hard. You can't spend all this time thinking about what could possibly go wrong. But what you can do is think about the characteristics of a business leader and of a business so that you're prepared in any eventuality. If something happens to you, how can you shift? How can you pivot? Where are you with financially? How financially strong are you? I was at a conference. I think Warren Buffett, I heard, he said, it's like, debt's like driving down the road and you've got a dagger sticking out of the steering wheel right at your heart. And the more debt you have, the longer and sharper it is. So you hit one bump in the road, boom, it pierces your heart. Where are you financially? How strong are you? How stable are you? Have you thought those things through so you're prepared for eventualities, because something's going to happen to you? So think about the building blocks, the fundamental building blocks or elements of your business that are going to be most important to be successful through any disruption.
Yeah, outstanding. So I want to pick a little up on the thought of like leadership traits and what makes a leader, a business leader in particular, a great leader. So at the risk of putting you in a position to have to give some cliche answers that are in many leadership books, but I wonder how you might think of that today, and if that's different given what we've experienced in the last 6 to 7 months than perhaps what you might have thought 5 years ago. Yeah. But as business leaders look at going forward, what are the types of things that jump out to you?
I think there's timeless traits of a leader that it's not just the cliche of the day. And what I had a chance to do was watch my dad and Jay work together. And the first, some of the crisp elements I remember that they talked about is they never blamed each other. Mm-hmm. And when something went wrong, and lots of stuff went wrong, they would never say, "I told you so." They would say, "What's the problem? Let's analyze the problem. Let's figure out a solution." Now that seems pretty simple. But of all the things that you could run through and all the time and energy you could waste, kind of having that play, okay, just be calm. Let's understand where we are, have the discussion. And we had an example in our case where it was two of them. Two heads are better than one. Talk to somebody, find a trusted advisor, find somebody another chamber member, a friend, somebody in your organization that you trust, you could bounce things off of, because it is hard to do it alone. No. And we were fortunate that they had that. And I remember a story, some other folks, that sometimes you're wired differently, and maybe you're wired differently where you have to blame or you have to explode for a period of time when something goes wrong. And there's a great story of somebody on their management team that would always take the blame, even if it wasn't their fault. Okay, my fault. So this person could spew and get through his process, and then they could figure out what the problem was and find a solution. So lots of different ways around it. But there's no secret, and there's no shortcut. You got to take your time, and think through it, and figure out where you are really. That's a big thing.
Yeah, outstanding. So we're hearing like consistent themes, right, throughout all of our speakers about putting one foot in front of the other, like just get started. Stay calm, assess the problem, lean on each other. Those are just great kind of universal leadership traits.
Absolutely.
No question. So the other thing that we've been talking about is West Michigan being well positioned in what I might think of as the post-COVID world.
Sure.
I wonder if you might be able to just shed some insight from your perspective on how is Grand Rapids well positioned? What do you see in terms of resources or characteristics of our community that position us well for growth going forward?
Well, the story that I kind of talked about originally, and while I reflect on my experience of the story that I had, that story was repeated all over Grand Rapids for generations, and it's being repeated today. You're repeating it today in your own certain way, because there's a resiliency built up in this community to deal with things and to move forward through tough times. And I think if you look around, I think we're also pretty well balanced, pretty nicely diversified, if you will, with a good balance of different industries that are coming together that allow us the chance to kind of adapt and adjust based on some of the things that are happening in the marketplace. And when you come here, one of the nice things you can avoid here, you may have Michigan winters, but you don't have earthquakes. We don't have fires. We don't have mudslides. There's a lot of things that provide a stable environment on which you can build a business. We're nicely positioned in the middle of the country. We have access to, to international markets, certainly through Canada. I know the relationship we have there has been strong. And so I think you can build up the external factors, but I think it's the internal factors. It's all of you participating here, and it's connecting with groups like the Chamber and many other groups, whether it's business groups or other sorts of institutions, if you will, that you can connect with. And Grand Rapids is big enough to have some mass, yet small enough to know everybody, and so that you don't get lost. And I think those are some of the elements that can lead to us being really well positioned. And I would expand it, not just Grand Rapids, take the whole labor shed or the whole West Michigan region. There's a lot of connections to the Lake Shore and north and south primarily, a little bit east as well. But we're in a really nice position to be strong, to be able to adapt and adjust kind of as a community.
No doubt.
To where things are going forward.
No doubt. So you spoke in your comments, and you and I have had a few conversations outside of this about this concept of the maybe obligation or opportunity that business leaders have to be community leaders, to lead in some of those other segments. This will maybe be my final question. So if I think about reflecting on that, and really for our leaders that are out there listening, wanting them to leave with like a final takeaway or a call to action or a plea to get engaged. I wonder if you might just speak to that a little bit in closing.
Well, I think, getting engaged is the biggest thing, and to think through how to do that. Because everyone's busy, right? I mean, we're all busy. And probably the best way I can try to articulate it is probably the experience that Stephen Andel and I had a number of years ago. We had set out a new goal for the company. We had a pretty aggressive growth goal that we wanted to achieve, and we started to communicate about it and talk about it, and we found that people say, yeah, that's great, but nothing was changing. Things weren't different. And I reflected on a quote. I was at the Learning Center at Steelcase around this time, and it was one of the quotes on the wall. It said, "Nothing changes until the leader changes." You can say all you want. Steve and I said a lot of stuff, and it was good stuff, right? We said good things. But until we did some things, and basically a lot of people in the organization said, hey, there's a few people on your team that aren't going to be able to get us to where we need to go. You got to deal with that. Either move them into out of the company or into a different position, or do something. You're going to have to do something, Steve and Doug, before we believe you're serious. You're going to have to act differently, and you have to demonstrate your desire to change with your deeds, not just your words. And that was a powerful piece. So Steve and I, we had to kind of come back and reassess and really look at, okay, how's our team going to be formed going forward? What are we going to do? What actions are going to happen so that we have not just the credibility with the rest of the organization or the community, but the right pieces, the right elements, so that we could be successful going forward. And so I think there's a huge element around this change management stuff. And the last thing you want to do is talk about buzzwords or interesting theories or stuff like that. And you know this so well. You got to do it. You're going to come into work tomorrow morning. You're going to go to work every day, and you're going to do something different tomorrow than you did today, because you're going to want to be better. And you're going to do something different because you're going to want to have a better influence on your customers, on your employees, and on your community. And you're going to want to do a better job of creating more opportunity for more people to have income. You're going to build your business up. We had a fun, that's the responsibility of a business leader. I remember a number of years ago, a couple years before my dad passed, and I came to see him, and he goes, Doug, I was just thinking about what Amway's going to do for the next 50 years. I'm like, well, that's interesting. You're 90. But it's that mentality. And then it's always this, we have to go, we have to be better. We have to grow, because we're going to have to provide more opportunity for the people who are part of our business and our community. And so that's the sort of thing that pops in my mind when you talk about the final message. Take the step, take the risk, take the initiative, but it starts with you. It starts with an individual. the leader has to change. Nothing's going to change until the leader changes. Nothing's going to change in the business community until business leaders change, and we have a role in the broader community.
Nothing changes unless the leader changes. Powerful. Doug, I appreciate your time, appreciate the chance to ask you some questions.
Absolutely.
You sharing some insights and teaching us some things about perhaps the history of Grand Rapids and how we've seen business rally to do really powerful things in our community. And that's what we're on the edge of again here today.
Right.
So that wraps up our keynote conversation for the day. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Chamber President Rick Baker and Chamber Board Chair Nelson Sanchez to say a few words. Thank you.